Hey there, listeners. This is Terry Cowley, your host of the R.M.Williams Outback podcast. Thanks so much for being here and welcome to Season 3.
G'day, my name's Ken Eastwood and I'm the Associate Editor of Outback Magazine, and I'm temporarily taking the helm of the Outback podcast from my colleague Terry Cowley. In issue 162 of Outback Magazine, I've written and photographed a major feature on a region of Western Australia that a lot of people might not know much about. It's a little bit of a secret. It's called the Gascoyne. It's at the westernmost point of the Australian mainland. It just doesn't receive the publicity or the kudos perhaps of the Kimberley or the mining powerhouse of the Pilbara. But yet the Gascoyne is this extraordinary area with this fascinating history, incredible landscapes, 2 World Heritage areas, thriving industries of horticulture, pastoralism and tourism in particular. It's beloved by fishers, and it's one of the only places in the world where you get to swim with whale sharks, the world's biggest fish, which is pretty cool. And you can snorkel right off the beach onto Australia's largest fringing reef. Joining me to chat about this incredible area, the Gascoyne, is Tim Bray, CEO of the Gascoyne Development Commission. G'day, Tim, and welcome to the Outback podcast.
Morning, Ken. Thanks very much.
Look, can you just give us an overview perhaps of the Gascoyne region? Where is it? How many people live there? What's it like?
Sure. Although you might have to cut me short at some stage. You know, it's great to love your job, and I really do. And it's easy to love a place like the Gascoyne. So it's a bit of a hot topic for me. You know, very roughly, the Gascoyne's about halfway between Perth and the Kimberley. So about 1,000 kilometres north of Perth. Right on the coast, stretches a fair way inland. Very small population. There's only about 10,500 people in the entire region. 4 towns, Carnarvon, Exmouth, Gascoyne Junction and Denham around Shark Bay and Monkey Mire, and a few Aboriginal populations as well. But it's still a big area, and it's only in Western Australia that it could be called small. So there's about 200 countries in the world. The Gascoyne's bigger than half of them, which gives you a sense of not only how big it is, but how little there is there in terms of population. So if you spread us all out over the landscape, you wouldn't be able to see your neighbour at all.
So you joined the Gascoyne Development Commission in 2023. Yep. What attracted you to the area, and what did you get excited about when you got there? The
landscape's always a key part of it, but I think what you love if you're in my game is the people. It's their depth of commitment to the region, to its history, to its industries, to each other, to the potential, to the history. And the balance of those things. You hear people all the time talk about wanting to be more connected to their communities, and they seem to think they need a new app on their phone or a new social media platform to do that. No. Move to a country town. You will be so instantly connected to people, it'll get to be a pain in the neck after a while. That's tongue-in-cheek, but you know people for what they are, for what they are passionate about and what they're interested in.
One of the things that struck me as I was driving around the Gascoyne and chatting to people, particularly pastoralists who I guess are working hard throughout the entire year, was a lot of them would talk about the summer, when temperatures are often in the high 40s, days and days in a row, 10 o'clock at night can still be above 40 degrees. Is it a tough place to live, Gascoyne?
Well, tough and lovely at the same time. Like, the environment is incredibly harsh. But for most of the year, most of the population, like everywhere else in Australia, lives along the coast, and it's just gorgeous. Cool nights, sunny days, breezes, blue water, and not very much competition for all of those things either, by the way. So, I've got a view it's probably the best weather in Australia. It's not quite as hot and sticky as it is when you go further north, and not quite as cold as when you go further south. And for most of us, most of the year, it's just a lovely place to live.
So you don't get that high humidity that say, the Kimberley would have, that sort of thing?
No. And if the temperatures inland get to be a bit too much, that and the flies, you're never too far away from the coast and a dip in the ocean.
I start the feature that I've written in Outback Magazine with the story of Bullara Station, and I partly did that because I feel like it's almost this microcosm of the Gascoyne story. So originally, obviously, Indigenous people lived there. The story of the area is very much, it was established as a sheep grazing area initially. and then has sort of changed over time. Boolarra had tried a bit of horticulture, that sort of thing, then moved away from wool sheep into meat sheep, and then moved to cattle. And now also tourism, and tourism is actually providing about 50% of their revenue on Boolarra Station. And it's extraordinary. You've been to Boolarra Station, you're out on this station, and people are just queuing up pretty much to come in the door. There are 450 people there a night who are staying everything from shearers' quarters and glamping tents through to their own camper vans and that sort of thing. There's an amazing bar, there's all that sort of stuff, and just love that's sort of the story of the Gascoyne almost as a whole, isn't it?
That and the connections. So I'm actually out at Boolarra in another week or two, by the way. They're part of the Gascoyne Food Festival. Their event sold out the same day, but then if you know Tim and Edwina, they run their business with the passion that can only come from people who are deeply invested in it. And it's that constant inquiry about what will work here, what's better for us, better for the landscape, better for the community. You know, it's really interesting. You go out there and find they've got an extraordinary chef who's related to the hairdresser up the road in Exmouth, which is a business we've just supported recently. So, you know, there's these little 6 degrees of separation, except across the regions it's often 3 degrees or less. But Boolarra, is a good example of how an industry's had to adapt slowly. So they still do little bits of everything, but they've found that tourism is something that they've got a passion for, that works really well for them. And there's a grit and a flavour to the experience out there as well. It's not just another campsite or another 5-star hotel. It's all, you know, really, really pleasant to be in and around, but you couldn't be anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, it's quirky too, you know. I mean, they turned the old wool shed into the bar and the cafe, and people are driving 180 kilometres just to go and have, you know, a couple of scones, you know. And then the outdoor showers that are completely open to the sky, you know, have become sort of a bit of a TikTok thing. And it's just interesting that for a station that is in a way in the middle of nowhere, like it's not on the coast like some of the other great tourist icons of the Gascoyne, and yet it's become this, tourism is such a thriving part of their business.
The showers are private too, by the way, just in case anybody's concerned. You're only sort of open to the sky. But when you stay in the repurposed shearers' quarters, you can still smell the lanolin in the wood. It's got a real flavour to it. That, you know, but at the same time, it's accessible. It's one of those things that sort of, it's almost a Goldilocks distance from things. It's far enough away to make you feel like you've put in an effort and you've been on a little adventure and you've got there. Not so far away that you're travelling for days and days and days to be there or anywhere else.
I was stunned when I was looking at figures on the Gascoyne region. You know, 2.4 million visitor nights a year in the region. And I guess, you know, I look at the rich array of wonderful experiences that there are there. You know, I mentioned before snorkelling with whale sharks, which was certainly high on my bucket list. I'd never done that before and had always wanted to do that. Now also you can snorkel with humpback whales. Monkey Mire, where the dolphins come in, and you can't certainly pat them or anything, but the interaction is very, very close. You're within metres of the dolphins that come in. Camping on the beach at Red Bluff on Quobba Station, I mean, what a gorgeous part of the coastline that is. On top of that, you've got the fishers coming in droves, catching deep sea ocean fish right off the rocks in some cases. In your case, what have you really loved in the Gascoyne? All those things and more?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Especially my first year there was a lot about just travelling around and meeting people, and you start to build this long mental list of I've got to come back here when I'm off the clock, and with my own family. I've got to say I haven't really cracked many of those yet. The number of tourists who swum with whale sharks and I haven't done it is probably not. It's probably going to be a badge of shame, but I'll get there eventually. But again, it's still the people of the region that make the difference. The landscapes are spectacular. You know, the first time you see Mount Augustus or Burrangurra in the distance, and it's just, wow, it seems to pop out of nowhere. And we're talking about a monolith that's considerably bigger than Ayers Rock.
And it's 1,100 metres above sea level. Like it is a big mountain.
Well, there's a goal. If I get a little bit less fat, I'll climb it one day too, just to stay away from the heat temperatures. But again, that you wander up and down the coast and perfectly accessible four-wheel drive tracks and just drive along kilometres of cliffs with blowholes and blue water and at the right time of year, whales that you feel like you could reach out and touch. And it just goes on and on and on. It's a spectacular place.
And you've got a little boat yourself. You get out a bit.
You don't necessarily need it though. we'd like to go out and slowly find our way around. So when I last put the boat in one of the boat ramps in Carnarvon, and we're standing down looking at the turtle munching the weed off the rocks right in front of us at the boat ramp. So you don't necessarily have to go very far.
One of the places I loved was, in terms of landscape, was Francois Peron National Park, that coastline there. Those deep, deep reds of the cliffs right on that turquoise water. There was so much wildlife in the water. There were ornate rays. There was sharks we could see. So many birds also on the shoreline. Just an extraordinarily beautiful place, and I think you'd recommended that I go there with an Indigenous guide everybody knows as Capes, and it was a fantastic day out. It was just somewhere I'd recommend people go. The tracks, I thought, were there were a couple of people who might have been struggling on the deep sand in there, but nothing that most people with a bit of nous wouldn't be able to get through.
No, that's right. Yeah, common sense will get you a long way, and there's not very many tracks where, well, unless you put in a real effort at being stupid, where somebody else won't be along at some point to give you a hand. So, it's just really about common sense and staying in the obvious places. And by the way, I don't think anybody's ever been disappointed by a day out with Capesy. Natural raconteur and entertainer, and able to connect that skill to the cultural knowledge as well. So
yes. Another extraordinary landscape that I guess I didn't get to explore because it's pretty much impossible unless you really know what you're doing, is these caves that are underneath the entire limestone area around Exmouth. And I chatted to this caver who's explored many of these caves on his own on behalf of the Australian Museum, and he's discovered all these hidden species down there, these blind millipedes and blind fish and all sorts of other things. He's had species named after him. He said there's one cave down there that you basically, you've got 7 kilometres of tunnel to sort of get through, and he's crawling through these things, and he says occasionally you get to spots where the carbon dioxide is a bit too high, and if he's on his own, he's got to be a bit careful with that. It's just sounds extraordinary.
And by the way, that's just the caves you can explore. So one of the features of that area is the cave system is far more extensive than that, but way too small for human beings to get into or get out of. So I think the term is stygoflora and fauna. That's the little bugs and creatures and critters and things that live in there. And in lots of ways, it's like the dark, cold version of a rainforest. You turn over any rock and there'll be 4 new things that have never been seen or discovered before under it. I know the guy you're talking about, and the way he discusses it is if you're standing anywhere on that peninsula, there are things under your feet, not very far under your feet, that nobody's ever seen before.
I think that because of the way limestone is formed, it's part of the history of this reef that has been there. And Ningaloo Reef now we know is, I guess, compared to the Great Barrier Reef, which might be bigger, but it's generally a long way offshore, whereas Ningaloo Reef you can pretty much swim to it straight off the beach in many places.
Again, you don't need giant boats. Mine's a little tinny, and that's more than enough for me in most places. There are certainly people who invest colossal amounts of money in very flash gin palaces, but your average family tinny will get you out to most of the fishing spots most of the time and back, or snorkeling, or whatever it is that interests you. But all those landscapes, to me, it's emblematic of how we used to need the skills of Aboriginal people to survive in that landscape. If you didn't know what they knew, you wouldn't survive there very long. And I guess Europeans and Asians have been turning up and bumping into that part of the coast for a long time, as you mentioned in the article. And without that knowledge base of Aboriginal people, you can't find water and you can't find food and you can't find shelter. It's an unbelievably harsh environment. In your air-conditioned four-wheel drive and with a little boat and a tent to go back to at night and a phone that works and all those sorts of things, suddenly it opens up our ability to experience that environment safely and access all the things it has to offer.
I was blown away by, again, just something that seems almost hidden, and yet it's very much part of the history of the Gascoyne, and that's when you start looking at the defence influence, say, in that area around Exmouth, and of course it's been an important place for the military, certainly since World War II. But we have the Southern Hemisphere's tallest man-made structure there in the Gascoyne. It's this 387-metre high tower antenna that's part of a very large antenna array, which has been there since the 1960s and is the way that we communicate with submarines and I believe other ships sort of around the world. It's extraordinary that's there in the Gascoyne. When I think of very high man-made structures, my mind didn't go to that.
You want to see the little cage that runs up and down those aerials, by the way. A couple of guys will spend essentially 6 months at a time painting one aerial, and probably the best view in the world, I would imagine, while they're up there. But again, it's that scale that sort of tricks the eye. You can see the aerials, obviously, from a long way back, and you think, oh, yeah, that's tall. And then you get closer and closer and closer and closer, and your neck starts to crane back. They're enormous.
Yeah. I'm interested in your take on the importance of defence to the region and I guess the importance of the region to defence. $1 billion is being spent there upgrading things like the Learmonth runway and that sort of thing over the next few years. It's had this history, I guess, of being very important particularly to American personnel who were based there for a while. While I was there, these 27 new satellite radar facilities were being installed as part of this network that looks at what's happening out to space, out to 36,000 kilometres from Earth. Yeah, and yet there's not many personnel who live there. There's not many military personnel. So it's not a very large base compared to, say, Townsville or something. So what is the importance of defence to the area?
So all things are relative, of course. So, there's 300-odd people who work in and around that industry, either directly with defence or as contractors. 300 jobs is a big number in a town like Exmouth. And it's an even bigger number when you consider that they're going to be there next year and the year after that and a decade from now. So it provides a sort of economic stability to the town. These are well-educated, well-paid and very stable workers in the environment. So 300 is a much bigger number to that town than you might think elsewhere. But it does put us on the map a little bit in terms of the importance of the town. As you mentioned, it's really high strategic importance to Australia, to the Americans in particular. Almost anybody operating a submarine in the Indian Ocean will have their communications run through that centre. And it means that things like keeping that town connected and working to the broader world become really important to lots of other people, not just people who live in Exmouth.
I couldn't believe, too, when you look at the history of Exmouth and when the Americans first moved in, everybody was driving on the other side of the road. They very much imported their culture. They were bringing in their food from America and all that sort of thing. And there's a fake water tower there on the site because it reminded the Americans of home. Just, again, quite a surprising history, I think.
Well, for a while there were more Americans than Australians there. And if you've ever tried, I love our American cousins dearly, but if you ever tried to teach them anything different, just give up. So clearly it was easier for the Australians just to observe the way the Americans like to do things, what they wanted to eat, where they wanted to drive, all that sort of stuff. That passed eventually, and it's very much an Australian town now.
Horticulture is obviously another huge industry in the area, and that area around Carnarvon where you live is sort of a food bowl, I guess, for Western Australia. And I think on, say, the east of the country, it's perhaps not known that it is such an important food bowl because much of that food, my understanding is much of that doesn't necessarily come out of the state. It's very much sort of for that Western Australian market, that sort of thing. But the yields are quite extraordinary, and I chatted to quite a few growers, banana growers, mango growers, sweet potato growers, veggie growers, and they said you can grow anything here. The soil and the climate is amazing. Plus, because it doesn't have the tropical climate, it doesn't get the diseases. How do you sort of see that horticultural role?
In a funny way, it's sort of similar to defence. So like most places, when you've got farmers involved with the land, they're interested in it being sustainable. They want it to work for them all the time. And if they're in an environment where they can use less pesticides, for instance, and grow a cleaner produce and manage as many aspects of the environment as possible. So give or take a bit in Carnarvon, you know exactly what the weather's going to be like tomorrow, next week and 6 weeks from now. You've got good access to high-quality water. The sun's going to be shining in the sky, and as a farmer, if you know what you're doing, that's a pretty good start. So they can grow nearly everything. Not only do they grow over longer seasons than they might in other areas, have another benefit is they're slightly out of sync with other markets. So they're producing fresh produce when everybody else is disappearing off the shelves. And that's often a commercial benefit to the farmers as well. But you're right, most of it at the moment goes to Perth.
Chatting to the banana growers, for example, they're explaining that their Cavendish bananas aren't like we would find, say, from Queensland. You know, Cavendish bananas from Queensland are generally pretty large things. They're a particular colour, that sort of thing. Coming from the Carnarvon area, they're about half the size and a slightly different colour. They don't tend to get that golden hue. And yet the yields that they're getting are extraordinary. Some of the best yields in the country because the conditions are extraordinary. And I remember one of the banana growers said to me, it's like, well, bananas don't really like growing here, but we found a way to do it that they just produce really well.
There's a number of crops like that. Asparagus is much the same thing. So, you know, the traditional wisdom that was you needed really cold weather to set asparagus. But one of the companies out there doing that at the moment has realised that what you need is to be able to stress the plant at a particular time. You can do that by turning off the water. Plant gets stressed, does the same thing it would if it was in the cold, and away you go. Farmers are pretty clever at figuring out their environment and working out ways to make that produce what they need it to produce. By the way, that has an important impact on the town because you've got people who are listening and thinking and planning ahead for their industries and their employers and themselves and their businesses and the town.
They seemed very innovative. When I was chatting to Marco Boric from Boric & Sons, one of the big producers, they're starting to use a lot more, I guess, shelters, tunnel shelters to actually protect from the wind and that sort of thing. And again, the yields he's getting, he says, are just extraordinary and well worth the investment that they've put into that.
And there's almost nothing they don't grow there. You can always lay your hands on really good produce in and around Carnarvon one way or the other.
Yeah. Yep. And so is your role at the Gascoyne Development Commission, you're across many of these industries and things, but are you sort of helping people solve the challenges that they have, or how do you actually function in your role?
It's a really good question, and after about 15 years in this or similar jobs, I'm not sure I have a really good answer. We try not to be seen as just a funding source because sometimes that is just what people need, a bit more money. But often it's about making connections and helping them think through different problems in different ways. I often think of actually as putting them in touch with their own expertise because sometimes people are so buried in the intricacies of their own community or their own business that they don't necessarily make the connections for the broader challenge. So, I often describe my job as I need to know everything about the Gascoyne there is to know, and that's not possible. So my get out of jail free card is as long as I know the person who does know everything you need to know about horticulture, for instance, or swimming with whale sharks or the defence industry. So it's mostly about relationships, knowing people, knowing businesses, knowing areas, and knowing who's really reliable to talk to when you need to know even more.
What are the challenges that people across the region are dealing with at the moment?
Probably wouldn't surprise you to know that most of the challenges are similar to what they are everywhere else. If cost of living pressures and housing pressures are causing problems in the city, dial that up to 11 in a regional setting. So there's that first and foremost. And I often think if you're doing my job in any of the major cities, your task might be to take a particular metric from 75% to 78%. You get a little improvement in whatever it is you're doing. In regions, often you're trying to move from zero to something, and that's a harder task. If you wanted more hairdressers in a metro setting, there are other hairdressers around, there are people with expertise and skills. We might be trying to get a hairdresser started in a town where there is nobody doing that yet. So that can be a bit more challenging. Having said that, it can be really fulfilling too. You open a new business in any country town, everybody in that town is going to buy something from you in the first 6 months. Part curiosity, part spying on you, part support for a new enterprise, and you've got a great opportunity there to turn that into genuine support as well. These towns are really lovely places to live. Your television works, your internet works, there are schools, there are hospitals and all of those sorts of things, and there are some restrictions around the services. Climate's fantastic, people are fantastic. All day long you feel like you're living anywhere else. When you really want and need to be somewhere else, particularly if your extended family, for instance, is somewhere else, there's a bit of challenge to that. I think there's a benefit too, by the way. I go to visit relatives in Sydney who query whether I want to drive 40 kilometres across town to see a different branch of the family, and I drive further than that to get coffee on it most days where I live. So you get a bit disrespectful, I guess, of the challenge of distance. You just go and do it. But we're usually working with much less and against more challenges. And the compensations for that, again, are other people.
It was a wonderful experience for me being out there in the Gascoyne, having spent, again, time either side in the Pilbara and time out in the Western Deserts. But the Gascoyne has sort of been an area that eluded me. One of the last times you and I chatted, we were in a bar in Denham, and the sun was setting, and the fishers were coming in with their catch of the day and cleaning them, and it was just this gorgeous setting. And you can see sort of in Denham the wind towers sort of spinning and that sort of thing, because it's a town that has sourced a portion of its energy from renewable energy for some time, and I know those turbines are ageing. But you'd said something to me, because we were talking about salt mining, and we're talking about rare earth mining and some of the other, I guess, industries that are around the Gascoyne. But then you'd said that the Gascoyne itself is the best place, you might have said one of the best places in the world, to generate renewable energy, and it could actually become this powerhouse, this Saudi Arabia of renewable energy. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I did say it was the best place on the planet to generate what I term renewable electrons, and there's a couple of reasons for that. And by the way, there's plenty of people listening to this who probably think that's an arguable point, but they're wrong. That's okay. The Gascoyne's better for that. We have what they term a very an exceptional energy profile. So during the day, across the Gascoyne, you have the strongest and most interrupted solar radiation you'll get just about anywhere.
It's 320 days of sunshine a year or something.
Yeah, well, at least.
Yeah.
Depending on whether cyclones have been passed. But as the sun goes down, the wind starts blowing. So you've got high solar energy during the day, high wind energy at night, and that gives you this really good, smooth profile for producing renewable energy, which is actually really important. So systems sort of struggle with massive variation in when energy is coming and going, and of course people don't necessarily only turn their devices on during the day. So that's the first thing. The other is we've got lots of good flat landscape that doesn't have other high commercial values, at least. So lots of places where the impact of solar farms and wind turbines and those sorts of things are less than it might be elsewhere. And generally will be to the benefit of the landholders of that land, whether they're pastoralists or Indigenous people or any of those sorts of things. And the scale of that, and again, this is not something that will be gone next year. The sun will continue to shine and the wind will continue to blow long after you and I have been and gone, and probably our great-grandchildren. So in terms of being a renewable and sustainable resource, all the necessary bits and pieces are there. It'd be disingenuous if I told you there weren't some challenges of that. Takes a lot of industry to get those sorts of things started, and we're a long way from most things, including big reliable ports, which you need to do, but then they're not insoluble. And your other problem, of course, is when you've made all of this electricity, if you just fed it into Carnarvon Township, everybody's hairdryers would blow up. We're talking about the real opportunity, I think, is to produce energy at an industrial export scale. And there are still problems that we're working on about how you get energy to distant markets, not just Perth, but Asia and the East Coast and further afield than that. It's not easy, and there are still lots of technical issues that the industry's got to work out.
But one of the big trials out there is a green hydrogen plant, is that right?
In Denham, they've got a hydrogen, solar and wind plant. And the whole purpose of that is Horizon Energy have built what's effectively a little isolated system. So they're trying to work out, can you reliably generate enough hydrogen to run your power system using just wind and solar, not backing up to anything else. And, we've been doing that with non-renewable energy for a couple of centuries. We've got really good at it. Renewable energy has got a learning curve that it's got to move along, and new industries coming along. We figure out new materials and new tech and new science. And then the really smart people who don't have my job have got to work out how to make all of that work so that lights come on in recording studios and those sorts of things.
As I said, it was an absolute pleasure being in the Gascoyne. It's an area, obviously, with an exciting future. It's got this incredible heritage and history, and amazing place to visit. Anything else you'd want to bring up about the place?
It'd be remiss of me not to put in a plug for just visiting, whether it's the food festival coming up over August. We're a day's drive from Perth. You can fly in direct to Carnarvon or Exmouth from Perth as well. And it's a great place to just knock around for a week, particularly if you like camping or caravanning. I mean, there are some really good hotels around the place as well. But if you just want to explore and see a lot of different things in a relatively quick period of time and yet feel you really got away from it, ask yourself when was the last time you looked at a genuinely dark night sky, absolutely scattered with stars. No better place in the world to do that than the Gascoyne.
Thank you so much for your time with us today, Tim. You can read all about the Gascoyne and have a look at some of my photos that I took along the way in issue 162 of Outback Magazine. You can get it directly from us at outbackmag.com.au, or any good newsagent should be able to serve you up with a copy of Outback Magazine. Thanks again, Tim, for joining us.
Thanks very much, Cam. It's a pleasure to be here.